How's it going? My name is Chioki. I'm the Director of Community Media here at the ICA, and I'd like to welcome you to VCUarts Lecture Series, the place where we bring you the beautiful minds of artists and curators. So, because I work in a contemporary art institution, strangers will sometimes ask me what a curator is. I know that you know, but let me give you my answer. A curator, a mix of three things. One is a DJ. A DJ digs in the crates. A curator digs in the crates of history and culture to find and commission great works. But a curator is also a theorist. And that's because they don't just present work to us. They find the big ideas that unite everything that we see. They provide the context and the frame that helps us to feel the impact of the work. And also, curator is a fashionista because they always look pretty good, I think. Since I've joined the contemporary art family, I've learned what a curator is. But because I work alongside Amber, I've learned what makes a curator excellent. Amber is a Swiss Senegalese American curator and educator specializing in contemporary art exhibitions and programs by national, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Senior curator here at the ICA, which I think you know, a graduate of VCUarts, represent. And just on my way to my office, I have walked by many things that she has curated, including exhibitions featuring Danilo Bopape, Naima Green, Morgan Bassicus, to say nothing of the massive endeavors that were Great Force and Traces of Ecstasy. What makes a curator excellent? It's because they're willing to follow an idea all the way down. It's because they will spend more time in the archive than anyone else. It's because they will deal with the colorful personalities of the artists for as long as it takes, because they will work with the insurance. They will talk to the people who install the work to make sure that it's just so, because they will write every bit of text that you read on those damn placards. Anyone who can do that more than the next person is excellent. And Amber Esseiva curated Dear Maisie. I'll let her tell you about it. Amber Esseiva.
Thank you so much, Chioki, and thank you all for being here. It's my pleasure to talk about this show, which has been years in the making and has included so many collaborators and shifting ideas and shifting notions of what I do here and how I can continuously try and pull it off. This show, I think, encompasses all of those challenges and opportunities the most. So let's start with the subject at hand. So, like I said, this has been years in the making. It's been about 4 years. I keep saying that and time goes by, but I think it's still 4 years of research and an deep interest in this figure that is so important to our country, but really important to our history here in Virginia, amazingly Meredith. She was born in 1895, died in 1984. So had a whole life and a history before I was even born. I came across her in 2019 by accident, by research that I was doing for another show. And I was shocked at the fact that I never heard who this person was. And then shocked again at all of the contributions that she was able to pull off in her life and in the lifetime that she lived in the United States, which was a particularly terrible time for a person like her. But I didn't have time to get into it, so I put it aside. And about 2 years later, I went to her archive at Virginia State University in Petersburg, Virginia, for the first time. These are some of the first images that I took there. An image of her from a scrapbook, and an image of a slide of the home that she built here in Virginia. I spent about 2.5 years in the archive, and was lost half the time because I'm not an archivist. And every time that I would go back into that archive, I would find a new interest, which would require me to start from scratch looking for that interest again in the archive. So it was a bit messy. The archive consists of 5,000 pieces of ephemera, so photographs, blueprints, letters, everything that was basically in her home in Petersburg at the time of her death. So things like menus are in the archive. Everything that was, they just pulled her drawers in her house and put them in an archive. But that archive is 99.9 significant in that it traces her life in architecture, her life as a activist, as a painter, as a partner to her to Edna Mead Colson, who was her partner at the time. And it tells the history and the story and from a personal, intimate stance of a person who was so many things and defied all odds. And so this research, in this research, I had to start from the beginning. So like I said, Ameza was born in 1895. She grew up in Lynchburg, Virginia. She was the product of a biracial marriage, which was illegal at the time. You see her father on the bottom of this page and her mother, Emma, on the top. And then this is an image of a small group of her family. And when I started to do research on her family, I had to start with her relationship to her parents and Virginia's relationship to biracial unions, and how significant that plays into Virginia's history. Her father was an architect, like I said, and her mother was a seamstress. And her father insisted on building a suitable home for his Black family in Lynchburg, Virginia. This is a picture of one of the first homes. There was two on Monroe Street. And in 1915, her father would end up committing suicide. Many of the correspondences in her archive talked about the great deal of persecution and strife that he experienced for building a home like this for Black people. And he lost a lot of business as an architect. He lost a lot by way of his reputation. And one can only assume that led to the events that took place. Shortly after that happened, Ameza Meredith immediately enrolled herself in Virginia State University to study art education. But while she was doing that, she took on all of her father's materials, essentially his archive, which included blueprints and which included plans from him and his family, who were all craftsmen and builders, many of them. And she started to teach herself the trade. Her father warned her against studying architecture. He told her it was not a place for Black people, and it was not a place for women, and it was not a place for queer people, which all things she was. And so she decided to teach herself the profession through his profession. That would lead to a lot of activity in her life, but most significantly, it would lead to the construction of her home in Virginia, which she affectionately called Azurist South. Azurist takes this name. These are two of quotes from a mausoleum. Meredith that describes the name Azurist. Azure speaks to the color blue, speaks to the sky, speaks to the horizon. It was an embodiment of hope for her, and an openness and a possibility in Jim Crow America, which was just confining for her and for people like her. And so Azurus became the namesake of two really significant architectural endeavors for her, but primarily her home in Petersburg. So in 1938 to 1939, she would go on to build a home for her and her partner, Edna Mead Coulson, on Virginia State University's campus. Her archive included these incredible scrapbooks, and this was a particular scrapbook that showed the process of construction of her home from the beginning of the foundation of the bricks to the end and to the first party that she had. And the home, when this is a bit of information that really sparked my interest from the beginning, was inspired from her time in New York. So after she graduated from VSU, she went on to get a master's degree at Columbia University in New York. She could not get a master's degree in Virginia because of limits on education to her. And so, like many people, she went north to get a master's degree. Her partner would follow her and went north also to Columbia University and would become the first person to get a PhD, first Black person to get a PhD, first Black woman to get a PhD at Columbia University. And while she was in New York in the 30s, she went to an exhibition at MoMA, and it was an exhibition about the international style, which was a really dominant way of style of building in the 30s in Europe, primarily by white men. She saw this show at MoMA, was really inspired, came home, and about 3 years later started to build her house. This house is Azurus South. It is the main source of inspiration for the exhibition's design, which I'll talk about, and for the exhibition. One of the many challenges that I faced in doing this research was, number one, what to do with a bunch of old stuff, what to do with someone's history and someone's legacy that is no longer here, and what to do with an architecture exhibition. All things that we had never done here and that I don't do. You guys, most of you have been here before, and you know that what we do is commission new works of art by living artists. We don't really function as a history museum in that regard, where we show old artifacts or we even show any old stuff. Everything is pretty new here. And so all of those challenges were answered and solved through a series of collaborations that I'll get into. But one of the main things that struck me, that inspired me the most, outside of the fact that she built a house after an exhibition, was the letters that were available in her archive. There were hundreds and hundreds of letters between her and her students. She didn't have any kids, so her students were her children, and she corresponded with them throughout her whole life, till the time of her death. She corresponded and she organized with other politicians, with other groups advocating for Black people in education, in architecture. And so these letters were really important to me. And the letter, or the epistolary form, became a way of me solving the problem of what to do with history and what to do with old stuff. And it allowed me to think about an exhibition that was a letter back to a person and the history that they worked so hard to substantiate. And so Dear Maisie comes from this letter from one of her most beloved students, Stafford Evans, who would go on to be a really famous artist in his own right. The VMFA had a wonderful show called Communications Village, I believe it was about 2 years ago, that told the history of Stafford and the communities that he built in upstate New York. That was her student. So we took this greeting to her, and made it into the opening neon in the show, and made it the kind of backbone to the show by calling the show Dear Maisie. Another thing that was really incredible and meaningful for me in her archive were these completely insane scrapbooks where she collected every aspect of her students' lives, from their birthday cards to their achievements to all of the relationships that they would go on to form because of their time at VSU. So both the scrapbook and the letter became a really kind of central force to inspire me to build this show. So here's the neon that I mentioned that takes Stafford's handwriting and makes it the kind of marquee for the show. Oop. Um, One of the all the collaborations were important, but one of the most significant ones were with Emmanuel and Jen, which make Adwo. They're really incredible. They're an architecture firm essentially, but they're educators at Columbia University, which was really profound to me given Amaza and Edna's time there. And then they've become these really interesting thinkers in the exhibition space, building exhibition designs and artworks that are thinking about architectural history and spatial thinking as it relates to contemporary art exhibitions. So they came on board really early on. It was a 2-year collaboration with just me and them before the artists were brought about, before the artists were fully brought into the fold with their works. And they thought through all aspects of making her home, Azra's South, and various aspects of her life part of the exhibition. So one of the first things they presented to me, and anything that they presented to me became part of the exhibition because it was really just thoughtful. They were really, I can't kind of understate the importance of having collaborative thinkers in the research process, because the research process is just a very lonely space. And so they provided me with a kind of perspective that I really needed. So their first suggestion to me was, we need to figure out how to make Azra's South appear in the gallery in a significant way. So they took basically what you see in these red dotted lines, the wrap of the house, and turned it into this really major wall in the exhibition that splits the exhibition in a really important way. So this is kind of their first plan for making this well, it's 60 feet now because we didn't do the curve, but 60-foot curtain that shows both the exterior and interior of her home. You kind of start the gallery in her bedroom and you end in her kitchen. These are some of the really early mock-ups of what that would look like in this space. Most of you have seen the show and it doesn't look like that, but it was the first moment of intrigue where I knew that we were kind of onto something. Another kind of early one. And then the next thing that they proposed was a way to devise a split in the gallery that allowed us to adhere to fact and that allowed us the freedom of fiction and experimentation. So this giant curtain that you see in the middle of the space basically makes that split. On the right-hand side, there is a about 70-foot timeline of her life from 1912 to the 1980s. And everything beyond that curtain is an artist's response to her life and her legacy. So it allowed us, like I said, to have the history portion of her life, the archival portion of her life. It provided us a split that is aesthetically pleasing and another area so that artists can start to blur fact and interject their own practices and their own responses to her. This is another really early idea for what the timeline would look like, could look like. It looks a little bit different, but some of the core tenets are still there. The first thing is her color palette. So there are dozens and dozens of interior design plans in her archive that show various color schemes that should have been attributed to rooms and were attributed to her rooms that she had built. And the designers took that and they made it into a sort of legend that allowed us to use these colors as guiding forces, interpretive aids to her life. The other thing that they did is that they started to introduce abstraction into their process. So, you know, spending so much time in this archive, you can't help to think about how you might be memorialized or how people that you know might be memorialized. And it brings you to the kind of conclusion that archives are deeply important spaces, but they're flawed. They don't include all aspects of your life. They can't. They're just this kind of snapshot of a moment. And so, in order to suggest those missing pieces, the archivists decided to include shapes from various archival materials that were not included in the timeline as a way of creating themes, which I'll talk about, but as a way of suggesting what is missing in an archive, what can be missing in the archive. So these are kind of just examples of how they did that. One more example of how there's a lot of these. So what became of that is a series of sections that dictate her life, that dictate aspects of her life that I felt more important, that were really important, not more important, but really important to my work. So things like her early, or my approach to an exhibition and my interest in using the letter as a form of response, or as a license for experimentation. That starts the section off. All of the text that's included in this timeline is deeply indebted to a recent book by Jacqueline Taylor titled Amaza Envisions Herself Modern, which is basically the only full biographical text about her life. And it's quite recent, happened halfway into my research process. Other sections tell the story of her building her home in Virginia, that are designated by that signature blue that you see throughout the show. Another thing that we were able to do in not having to deal with the old material was that we were able to play with scale and play with experiment with ways of creating an environment. So I was really drawn to her notations in her scrapbooks and in her archive, and I was able to use that and blow them up and to put them into different contexts by making them into vinyl pieces. If those things, things like a seat before the fire were included as small as they were on the tiny notebook that they were, you wouldn't really have the same experience to her and her life and her hand. And so that felt really important to me. This is another section about her relationship to her students, how important that was. Another really significant figure is Regina Perry, who was an art history professor at VCUarts, but was the first Black curator at the Met, and a really important, the first Black female to get a PhD in art history. And so like her, this section really tells her impact, the story of her impact to her students, and the mentorship that she had. And then this is another view of that curtain where you see the exterior and the interior. There are really, beautiful choices that were made by the designers. So usually in the curatorial process, there's a list of like a dream list, and then there's a budget, and then there's the realities of what you can make with those two things. And this solution, which worked with essentially a theater company, a company that's does backdrops for theater productions, to print this giant scale model of the house, was one that came from the creativity of the designers. It also was a workaround, like originally the idea was, let's just build a huge wall, but I won't tell you how much that costs. So we built this curtain instead, and they used cinder blocks and other materials like steel rods and bars to talk about the materials associated to the architectural practice of her building her home. And then it creates this incredible translucency where you can see both sides of the gallery, people interacting with the work. Yeah, there's an example of that. Another thing that we did was recreate her carport at her home. I'll say that her home is open to the public. It's on VSU's campus. I highly encourage everyone to go visit it and feel it in person. It really is a kind of oasis. The campus follows pretty standard Virginia architectural plans in that it's all red brick, and this house is nestled in the little forest on the campus. It is an incredible thing to experience and to try and wrap your head around what this meant to have a house like this in the 30s in Virginia. A lot of times I talk to people about Virginia's history and relationship to architecture, and the way that it is so known for being a city filled with red brick, a city adhering to kind of neoclassical ways of building, but it also is a place where the first international style house was built, and that's part of Virginia's history that a lot of people don't know, and that I didn't know. There's this a view of the ways in which the house came in from its signature blue strip to the carport that's has some distance from the last picture. Another thing that we did that felt really important was to convey the location of this house, just how deeply nestled in the woods it was, and how much it was important for her to build a sanctuary. And so if you are in the house, if you look out any window in the house, all you see is woods. You don't see any other vantage point from the university. She called this in her journal her verdant backdrop. So we decided to recreate this in the gallery, as well as a glass brick curved window that was on the side of her house. So the next aspect of my collaboration is my work with the contemporary artists in the show. Every single one of these artists had no idea who she was when we started the process. So when I invited them, I was like, hey, I know this is a big ask. I know you're busy and you have your own practice, but will you just make a work of art dedicated to this person for us? And all of them were so open to this and so generous to my research and to the archive and to aspects of her life that resonated with them. The way I kind of chose the artists, this is always a question that people ask me that is hard to answer, but ultimately every one of these people have a deeply resonant aspect of their practice, their identity, their way of moving in the world that is much like hers. The first artist is Colleen Smith. Colleen Smith is really known for making these multimedia environments that center around film and moving image. For this work, the thing that impacted her the most was her the community that she built in New York. So I mentioned earlier that her home in Virginia was named Azarus South, and that was built in 38 to 39. And in the 1940s, her and her sister Terry decided that they should buy a plot of formerly swampland in Sag Harbor, New York, most known for the Hamptons, and make a series of subdivisions, essentially make a subdivisions and sell out plots of lands to Black people only. So this was unusual in that it was a place where Black people owned a home at this time, and let alone waterfront property. This community is still standing and is still, for the most part, in the hands of the families that originally started that place, but that's not always the case. But it is a Black stronghold in Sag Harbor. And so she was really drawn to that. The images that you see on the screen on the table came from a mix of 16 millimeter and digital footage that she took of Sag Harbor today. She spent time there. She spent time with the Azarus North Homeowners Association. She spent time in a Mausoleum Meredith's family home, which was called the Terry Cottage. And she made this video. And she also created this altar space for that community, which continues her work of creating these altar spaces, but creates it through the unique lens of Azurist North. So it includes shells and branches that she found around the home. It includes a 1970s wave machine, thinking about the seaside community that she built. It includes a pair of braids that comes from an image of Mosley Meredith with its long braids on the seashore there. It includes a piece of azurite, thinking about azurist. Um, Her interest in film is really related to the relationship to Blackness and film and media, and how that is so closely associated to surveillance. So what she does is she puts these kind of surveillance cameras, these CCTVs, on this table, which then overlays on top of the film, creating a sculptural video relationship that speaks directly to the subject or the interest in her particular work. What's different here is that most of the times we understand surveillance as a kind of hidden mechanism, right? And in her work, the cores and the mechanisms that kind of power surveillance are apparent in a very almost ruthless way. The chords are all knotty and they're all over the place, and that's her work, and that's her criticism on the relationship to Blackness and surveillance. There are amazing moments that she has created in that back room that continue that verdant backdrop that I spoke about in the window space, by including the verdant backdrop of Azurus North. So you have in one crevice Azurus North and another Azurus South in the woods that surrounded those spaces. The figurine is also very important in her work. She's thinking about in simplest ways, the dollhouse, the ways in which we are kind of conditioned to think about building space and building home in a very early stage, and those figurines come in larger than life, next to other works of art in the show that were really beautiful surprises. This is an example of Amaza at Azurus North, with these two long braids and the braids that she put on her altar that are kind of wrapping around the azurite stone. So again, like really deeply sensitive and nuanced, a nuanced approach to her life. This is Lucchesa Bronfman Verissimo, a VCUarts alum, a grad in painting and printmaking, who was really interested in her life as a painter and interior space maker. And she was inspired by this painting that she made in 1973, and she uses it as a source to build this mural in the background, which is a section of the painting. You can kind of follow some of the lines. A lot of the slippages that happen on the side of the gallery where the artists are is that it's almost hard to tell where the hand of the artist stops and where Amaza Meredith begins. And one of the things with Lucchesa that really brought her into the fold is the similarities in the painting technique and in the ways of thinking about shared space amongst kin. And so the murals in the background, that's a dedication to her painting. But in the foreground are these 5 pieces that are made of handmade black paper pulp that the artist made. It takes from a series of interior design swatches that the artist or that Amaza suggested for her homes and makes them into banners. On top of a selection of these are phrases from the archive in which Amaza describes the way that she wants the inside of her homes to feel. So one thing that's really important to kind of contend with or understand is that the question of why Amaza Meredith chose to build a home for her and her lover in the style of white male European architects. In one way, it sets the architecture aside from all other architecture in the region. But its interior is really where she started to play or upend these ideas around the international style. So the international style is very much known for its lack of ornament, fairly plain and simple and modern. But the inside of her home was filled with the craziest tile work, iron work. It was made of 2 bedrooms for her and Edna, equal bedrooms, so not a primary and a secondary room, a vanity room, 2 artist studios. So the interior of the home was quite queer, where the exterior is a nod to, kind of hetero-masculine architectural style. And so that was really important for Lucchesa to kind of dig into and to think about that kind of interiority and the ways in which she um, presented and in times did not present her queerness. Some people could read her interior design of her home as like the ultimate queer floor plan, right? Like there's no kids' room, there's no guest room, it's just 2 ladies' rooms, a vanity, and some studios. But others could read that as a way of blending in. It could be read as just 2 faculty members living in a house in 2 different rooms. And so that kind of slippage and that reading is not unlike many things that Amazali Meredith did. This is Abigail Lucian, also was a former VCUarts professor who dug into her relationship with Edna and was really inspired by queer love and her relationship with Edna. She made these 2 pieces, a vanity and this giant trellis in the galleries. The vanity was really thinking about the years and years of correspondence between the 2 of them, which, to put it bluntly, was basically Amazali Meredith begging for Edna to date her. Was like, Edna was her professor and she was the student, so whatever. But she basically was like, I know you like other students, but I'm the one, for years and years and years. And so she, Abigail, that is, built this monument to unrequited love and to her pleading. She imagined the vanity space as a space that Amaza sat in to write these letters. I don't have a great picture of this, and excuse me, but if you were to be in the gallery and you looked at the work, there are various objects on the vanity that you would find on a vanity. So a compact, a mirror, and a comb. Those are all made from melted down Confederate monuments or monuments trinkets to make this altar. There's also a piece of azurite. The black tile was from the vanity room that was adjacent to the bathroom that was black tile. The trellis was thinking about the space as a space of companionship, meaning the space, her home, and the grounds around her home. Like I said, they hosted many events, many parties, and she wanted to make a piece that thought about the ways in which that community just kind of lived and prospered in the woods. So she made a trellis, this kind of companionship seat object that one would find in the grounds of a home, in the signature or close to the signature azurite blue. Next is a work by Shabalala Self. So Shabalala Self makes furniture, video, painting, sculpture that is thinking about a couple things, but most primarily the Black female body when it becomes the subject of cultural consumption, or it becomes the subject of popular desire. Many of her forms and her figures and her paintings portray women sort of over quite voluptuous and overly kind of represented, and it takes specifically an image of Amazali Meredith and her lover, her partner Edna, late in life. So if you go into the gallery, and excuse me for not including this picture, but there's a picture of Amaza and Edna where she's hunched over a wheelchair and she's wearing this houndstooth sweater. and thinking about the ways in which, if Amaza was alive now, the way she might have been turned into an icon or a subject of popular interest. She's situated, this is a fiberglass sculpture, she's situated on top of a recreation of her kitchen floor. Again, tile work was really important in her house, so she made this plinth and rug to recreate that. She's made this iron chair in the place of where Edna stands in a wheelchair in the picture. I don't know if I mentioned this, but it's very important. The archival pieces were printed on steel plates. There's a lot of ironwork and a lot of ironwork and metal work that makes its way into the show. And that's a direct homage to the land that the home was in. So the home was a plantation, and then it was a foundry, and then it was her home. So kind of a very stereotypical Virginia history of using space. And so this steel chair is kind of thinking about that foundry and that site. It speculates and takes for various pattern work that you saw in pictures, in black and white pictures of her home, and stitches together the closest thing to those patterns that we could find today through this cushion. Um, the one of the next artists in the show is a collective. Shawnee Peters and Joseph Coulier who make the Black School. The Black School made here I'll skip a little bit out of order, but essentially they made this environment in the back of the gallery. I'll go back to what inspired it. They were really drawn to Amaza's fight to build the art school at Virginia State University. So 1935, Amaza Meredith, before she builds her home, after she gets her a master's degree, goes to Virginia State University and says it's completely unacceptable that the standard for Black education is just industrial education. They must have an art school. So she fought for this, and the Black School was really inspired by this, being that they are building a school as two artists called the Black School in New Orleans that is set to open in 2025, 2026. So the environment they created thinks about the history of building schools for Black people and leads us into their endeavors today. These images appear in the space, and they're some of the early images of Amaza Meredith's students out in rural schools in Virginia. She thought it was really important, like not only is it important for people in this college or enrolled in this college to have an art education, but it's to extend that education to people that don't have access to it. So many times they were in single room classrooms teaching art to students where that just was not part of the curriculum. Some other images. The furniture in that space was developed by by Adwo, and it was really inspired by this fireplace in her study, Amaza and Edna's study, this kind of three-piece fireplace that they turned. Here's another more contemporary picture of it without the gold accents. They turned that into a series of modular furniture pieces that will then go back to the Black School at the end of this exhibition and be used for teaching and instruction. This corkboard in the back is essentially doing two things. It's showing you those pictures that I showed you of Amaza Meredith's students out in rural schools, and all of the work that went into building the Black school. So their capital campaign, their early blueprints, their community events. This large curtain includes an image of the building of one of the Rosenwald schools, so really early Black schoolhouses, and in doing so merges various initiatives on radical forms of Black pedagogical projects. The bookshelf does that too. It includes things like the Black Panther School and various other kind of models for building schools and building educational contexts for not just Black artists, but all Black students. And this is another view of the furniture, another view of the board. And then There's a work in our forum by Kapwani Kiwanga, Canadian, French-based artist that is really interested in both architecture and the archive and issues around archiving. She's built these 4 pieces that she considers frames in waiting. This continues a series of works that they have done before, where frames are installed in the gallery. And the idea is that at some point in time, either in the exhibition's run or later, the frames are taken down and used to build a discursive stage for people to enact programs in or to host classrooms in. That stage, once is built, is wrapped in an acoustic fabric. So the acoustic fabric that we would see in recording studios that absorb information, that absorb the words and the speech that happens in those rooms. She's thinking about that as like a conceptual and imperfect archiving technology, basically a fabric that can absorb space and absorb conversation that is completely illegible, which is sometimes the nature of an archive. Um, uh, the last piece of the show that extends to the exterior of the building is this really beautiful image that I fell in love with that includes Edna, her partner's hands on the steering wheel. They took a cross-country drive as 2 Black queer women in Jim Crow America, which, we take for granted now and is situated in one of the busiest intersections in Virginia. But that trip and that commitment to living and to being who they were, it really was encapsulated in this image for me and felt really important as the image that you confront as you're driving on your day-to-day route. And then the last thing I'll say about this work is that oftentimes when a lot of work like this goes into a show, it exists for the sake of the show and then it disappears, and that's heartbreaking for the people that have worked on it. And so we are working on a book for the show that will function as a record for the show, but more than that, it'll function as a reader for a Mausoleum Meredith, and it'll include the dozens of ephemera that I just didn't have the space to include in the show, and it'll extend on that in the book. It'll include, this is very early mock-ups of what the book could look like. It's not looking like that. But just to give you a sense of its scope, it'll be a 300 some odd page book that'll include new contributions by scholars in the field of architecture, by contemporary artists. It'll include all of the artistic interventions in our show and more. Our designers for the book are a group called Practice, Shan James and James Goggin, who are huge book nerds and a pleasure to work with, that have a really strong insistence in the archival and to how to experiment and show the archival in new publications. So we're really excited about that next chapter of the show and a way of kind of making all of this work not so ephemeral. And I've had, a couple opportunities to make books out of shows, and this feels like not the most important, but a very significant one to do a book for. And we're lucky to partner with an organization named Cara to make that happen, which is a really amazing research exhibition publication space in New York City, who are helping us get this book in all major museums and libraries. So the work that we do here will extend out into the world. I feel lucky that I encountered her when I did, because I think following that, there's been a lot of interest in her work and a lot of interest in her legacy, and the opportunity to tell this story in the way that it was told first in Virginia feels really important. This is a kind of project that could have easily been taken by a bigger fish, New York institution, but we got it, and we feel really fortunate for that. We're working very hard to get the show to travel, to be in other institutions, and to encounter other people in the United States. And the end goal for all of this work is to make it so that people stop being surprised of her life and her legacy. And she becomes more cemented in our conversation around American architecture and American history. And um, um, m- m- due pressure is put on people to preserve her archive, preserve her home, and preserve all of the work that she did. So there's about 15 projected or plans for homes in her archive, and it is not fully known exactly what else exists in this country that she built. There are things that we do know that she had um, the protection to put her name to, so like the home in Virginia on the campus or Azarus North. But there are other homes that could have very well been built under different names and different organizations for the sake of protection that we don't know whether they're still standing or not. So also say that this is the beginning of just getting her name out there and getting the preservation's efforts going to remember her and to memorialize her. And I think that's the last slide I have. And I'm happy to answer any questions. But I'll end by saying that we will be hosting a event on February 21st, led by the Black School and led by Lucchesa, which is a kind of collective performance altar building workshop that thinks about how a community can kind of ritualize and think about someone's impact, living or not, in the places that they live. So that's on the 21st at 5 o'clock. This is part of VCUarts lectures, and the next lecture will happen on April 8th. By Giovanni Anelli at 12 p.m. At VCUarts Qatar, which will be available online. So we thank VCUarts for their support in this talk and in our work. Yeah, and this show will close on March 9th. So tell your friends, come back, experience it. It felt like a really long run in the beginning, but now it's closing in on us. So there are a couple more months to get in. And again, I thank you guys for coming. I thank you for your interest in the work, and I welcome any questions or thoughts about the project. Hi. How are you, Catherine? A phenomenal architect in our mix. Oh,
I wanted to ask about, I guess going back to the beginning, thinking about the accolade, like, oh, sorry. Hi, Catherine Williams. Yes, I'm gonna.
hi.
I wanted to ask, I said this before to you, but this project is really meaningful to me because I live like 10 minutes away from the house and have seen it very often. So, um, I wanted to ask about the actual house being placed there because you didn't talk about like why, because like VSU doesn't have like faculty housing.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, was it because she was a woman? Was there like, what was the reason that they felt the need to provide her the land? Because I'm assuming the land was Virginia State's and they gave it to her or at least let her use it to have the house.
Yeah.
So,
So I can't speak on VSU's behalf to say like why exactly they let her do it. But it became very clear to me in my work that, following the death of her father, all of her grief and her ambition got poured into VSU. And she put all of her work into those students, into building the art school, and it became a home, a place that felt like home for her. And 1938, being queer, being Black, you need some sort of, and building a house that's just like, I'm different, you need some sort of protection from Jim Crow America. And I can only assume that that campus provided her with at least a buffer to the outside world. Like she could have easily gone to Lynchburg, where her father built her homes, and put that modernist home there, but she would have been the target of constant harassment. And the point, I think, for her in building this home and all of the other homes that she built was her way of protest, really her way of protest of living in Jim Crow America. And her response to that was just like, I want some peace and quiet. I want to be able to be home and not be harassed. And I think that being on that campus provided her another layer of protection. Maybe some only symbolic, maybe minor, but important, and it is, I can't speak to how the campus really felt at the time, but it's somewhat hidden. It's not hidden in the sense that it looks like that, but it's not, it's off the beaten path. Exactly. So that's my answer as to why. I don't know how or what led them to say yes. I suppose, she put everything into that school. So it seems maybe reasonable to let her live there because she was there all the time. But the house was, built with the help of the people she knew. A lot of her students laid the foundation, and it became a kind of student project in a lot of ways, and a development tool and projects. So that's what I would speculate. Maybe that's a fantasy, but it seems right. Oh, you go first, or
Hi, thank you. I was curious if you've had the opportunity to engage with any of her students, whether in the planning of the exhibition or in the actual presentation.
Yeah, a few of them. They're all 96 and to 98, and in the process of doing these shows, some of them have passed. So part of the work in the book is to kind of compile as many oral histories from those people that are still alive as I can. And one of the students is Regina Perry, who was her former student that I'm desperately trying to get as comprehensive of a interview in the book as I can. But not a lot of people are available to talk to. Her pastor, which was beloved to her, she was a huge figure in the Baptist church community. It was the site of many art shows and queer events. They didn't call it that, but it was that. Is still alive and will be part of the book. So as many people as I can get will be included. Yeah.
I want to thank you for this work.
Oh,
It's a real eye opener for me. I'm a student of hers who is not quite 80 yet. I'll be there.
Hi, welcome.
Oh,
Thank you for joining us.
I had no idea that she was a special person. She was kind and sweet and offered guidance. And I spent Saturday mornings there with perhaps adult students, college students, but that's where I was sent to learn about color and form. And it's incredible to me, my ignorance, that the whole world didn't grow up like that. Incredible.
Well, thank you so much.
Wait,
Honor to have you here. And yeah, I mean, that's a very common story. I think my early time at VSU, a lot of people that I talked to didn't even know what this house was. Now it's it's the alumni house. They're like, oh, it's the alumni house. It's it's not functioning as that, but it's designated as that. Yeah, it's again, there's a lot of more efforts that need to be put out there to kind of really put respect to everything that she did. So yeah, thank you for being here.
What church?
Gillfield Baptist Church. Still standing. Third oldest Black church, third or fourth. Don't quote me on that. But all right, even better. She built an extension to that church, an incredible chapel. She's interred there today. All her paintings are there in a couple rooms. No, her paintings are they're in the possession of the church and in desperate need of preservation and help.
I was there when she did a show. I guess I was 15.
Wow. So did you know Reverend Powell?
I knew her as Miss Meredith, because my mother knew everybody there. So we went to Miss Meredith's house with them. I had painted Miss Meredith's roof.
That's incredible. See, this is why we do this.
Who was a tinsmith, and a roof. He put new tin on her house, but I had painted silver, which basically I was almost like I was painting a mirror. It goes some July day, 2 days. So I got sunburned just painting a roof.
Well, thank you for that.
Boy, you the house of my mom, she, like I say, she was just Miss Meredith. And it was just normal to be somewhere with my mother, to be walking with somebody. I didn't know that she was a heavyweight. That's why I came to the show. Okay, I knew that she had something to do with building her house, which it was a peculiar house. It wasn't like any house that you had ever been in. But at the same time, she had, what I remember was this picture window that she had done on purpose so they could sit and eat breakfast and watch the birds, I guess in some bird bath or something, right outside the window. So the birds wouldn't even know that, they were entertainment. Well, I suppose I thought out a process that she had, I guess the whole house was like that, but I don't remember really walking through the house.
That's really cool.
I'll say that when you say a church, because I was thinking about this show, and I started thinking about all the heavyweights that were in Guilford, because Wyatt T. Walker was the pastor there, who was Martin Luther King's executive director. So in there, being at church every Sunday, we had Undine Moore, who was also a heavyweight in mute. But I was just going that in my mind. I was coming here, I was going to see this, and I was like, Guilford, evidently had a whole lot of heavyweights there.
Yeah.
No one even knew.
They have a whole archive too that's sitting in that church. It's really just another project.
I invited Reverend Lyons to come to this so he can learn something himself.
He's up in Manassas. So Reverend Lyon gave me this really interesting. It's funny that you bring up the picture window and the birds, because he was trying to describe to me her relationship to spirituality, which is harder to reconcile at this, at this point in time. How could you be, so religious and also so queer and so kind of enwrapped in a community that it was a lot of unspoken things, right? I don't think she ever advertised that, but Reverend Powell was basically everybody knew. And if you want to understand what her relationship to spirituality and the birds and the trees and painting was, it's kind of what you young folks do when you go take LSD. She was deeply connected to her spiritual world and her painting world and the natural world in a way that felt just really special. And so I was fortunate enough to hear stories like that from him. And so I'm really happy that you're both here and can share. And don't leave after this.
Say one last thing. Then you were talking about where the house is situated. What I felt in terms of strategy was out of sight, out of mind. And everybody could rub about. I didn't know. That's where I came to. When I saw that in the program, I had no clue. My mom never said anything about that. We just are human being as an human being. That's the way my parents were, okay? And at that time, results were the thing that they wanted to see. They didn't care about what you did, who you were. It was the results, because it was you're talking about Jim Crow. They were fighting things about opening making the library so blacks could not have to go to the basement. So you got Wyatt T. Walker walking out there with Bob B.B.'s book. They go into jail, for that. And that's when different things starts. All those people were about substance. They didn't care about, okay, what you do at home and da 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 da. They were about, okay, let's get together, let's make this happen. That's what their train of thought was. Even from a kid that I can remember. What we gonna do? Let's do it. That's it.
I'm really happy to hear you say that because it shows in the archive at least. She was writing presidents that I know she couldn't stand, and politicians, and she just was willing to kind of meet and get in a room with anyone to make some progress happen. Yes, finally. Sorry.
It's just a comment. I grew up in Petersburg.
And what was that?
I grew up in Petersburg in the 50s and 60s. Is utterly amazing.
Thank you.
And she survived.
Yeah.
Really.
I mean, I can't, it's hard to imagine.
But from my standpoint, I know nothing about Virginia State campus. It is amazing.
So it's an important note an important reminder for us, I think.
Yes, very.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Vivakar Shakia. Thank you very much for this very impressive and informative presentation. I really enjoyed, and I got a lot of information that's very, very useful because I'm also doing archiving and art exhibition projects. So I have two questions actually. One is, when you were doing archiving, did you find anything of his own writing, unpublished material that you were planning to include in the book?
What was the first part? Did I find anything?
Of her writings, articles or unpublished, materials that she wrote, and those materials are available do you find those in the archive?
A lot of what was in the archive was like really a lot of intimate materials. However, what was in the archive were many letters to Schomburg, to the New York Public Library, in which she insisted that her dissertation were published, that Edna's dissertation were published. So although the papers themselves, I found her thesis paper, were not included in the archive, the record, the evidence of her putting that work into major archives was. She also, in 1958, there was a symposium at the VMFA about the state of art and education and Black arts that she chaired, in which like all of these thinkers came and read papers. That's a whole other show. So like evidence of her writing and her work were in the archive, but not the writing itself. But it's available because she worked so hard to get it in public libraries.
How about her diaries? Any diaries that she...
A lot of diaries, a lot of scrapbooks, a lot of annotated objects. Yeah.
So are you planning to put any of those?
Yes, in the book.
Okay, yeah. So that
as much as our page count would allow. Budget allows. Again, like this should have been like a 4-part show with 4 different volumes of books, but we're going to start it, and then hopefully someone else will pick up all of the things that weren't properly addressed.
And you briefly mentioned that, it's traveling to other places, other universities. Do you have any potential taker for this exhibition, traveling exhibition?
We do. I'm not at liberty to name them yet, but we do have some organizations and museums that are we're in conversations with for taking the show.
Oh, congratulations. Best wishes for that.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Amber. And please join me in thanking Amber for her tremendous research